Dimensions of biodiversity, conservation and management. Learn more about how gender inequalities affect biodiversity, conservation in forestry, fisheries, agriculture and protected areas, how these inequalities can be addressed. And section 2 is all about from a gender perspective. Let's go. Biodiversity, gender differences and gaps. The term gender gap refers to any disparity and inequality between women's and men's condition due to their position or role in society. It concerns inequalities in terms of their participation, their access to opportunities, rights, power to influence and make decisions, incomes and benefits, and control and use of resources. Gender differences increase gender-based inequalities and accelerate the depletion of natural resources and the degradation of ecosystems. Such differences and gaps need to be addressed at all levels of society and require committed action. Efforts to incorporate gender issues into biodiversity, policy and projects are underway, but more has to be done. Continue to explore gender differences and gaps in 4 key areas. Point of reflection. Can you think of an example of how gender inequalities affect biodiversity conservation? Write your reflections down. Explore gender differences and gaps with regard to access to, control of and benefits from biodiversity in various economic domains and thematic areas. Forestry, agriculture, fisheries, protected areas, biodiversity, gender differences and gaps. Let's click on the keywords to find out more. Forestry. Across the world, women and men often have distinctive roles associated with access to and benefits from collection and sale of forest products. Globally, women's forest knowledge tends to be more linked to household, health and food consumption. This knowledge, which is particularly important during food crises, often goes unrecognized. Men's knowledge is generally associated with commercial uses and thereby compensated monetarily. This generates and perpetuates inequalities in income and power, as well as control and access to benefits. Forest management groups with a significant proportion of women in Latin America, Africa and Asia show better results in terms of collaboration, solidarity, conflict resolution and collective action. They also report higher levels of forest health. Benefits of empowerment. Empowering women in the forest sector can create sustainable benefits for them, their households and communities. Women's participation in forest-related decisions can maximize the contribution to food security from forests. For example, women often have substantial knowledge on the identification, collection, and preparation of forest foods. This can complement agricultural production and add nutritional value to family meals. Integrating a gender perspective in biodiversity policies and projects. Include gender issues in socio-economic analysis and outlook studies on the forestry sector. Encourage research of sex disaggregated data. Promote participatory methodologies for men and women to generate income from forests in order to reduce poverty and to sustainably manage natural resources. Develop and implement approaches that increase the equitable participation of men and women in forest-related processes and activities. promote equitable forest tenure systems through policies and laws that improve access to forest resources for the benefit of men and women. Agriculture. Women in agriculture, 43%. On average, women provide more than 43% of the agricultural labour force in developing countries. However, in many regions, due to discriminatory social norms and laws, they do not have land rights, enjoy limited access or control over resources, and are underrepresented in rural organisations and institutions. As a consequence, women's voices are rarely heard in decision-making processes for community-owned lands, and thus only receive 5% of agricultural services worldwide. Benefits of empowerment. 20%. If women had the same access to productive resources as men, the yields of their farms could increase by 20 to 30%. This, in turn, could increase agricultural outputs in developing countries by up to 4% and potentially reduce the number of malnourished people by 100 to 150 million. 26%. Closing the gender gap in labour markets of 95 countries will increase the GDPs of each respective country by at least 9%. And the global GDP by as much as $28 trillion or 26%. Fisheries. Women in fisheries across the world, 47%. On average, 47% of the 120 million people who work in the capture fisheries and post-harvest sectors are women. In aquaculture, this figure is up to 70%, 85%, while women represent 85% of employees involved in tasks such as evisceration, filling boxes, or other processing tasks. Few occupy managerial positions. 5.4 million. Women accounted for 5.4 million of the 45 million people engaged full-time or part-time in the primary fisheries and aquaculture sector in 2008, which means that they represented 12% of the sector's total workforce. Gender roles and benefits of empowerment. Roles in the fisheries sector are often divided along gender lines. For instance, harvesting fish in coastal and deep sea waters is almost always a male-dominated activity. Women in fishing households perform preparatory work, such as mending nets, which is rarely remunerated and not considered to be real work. One of the most current activities for women in the fisheries sector is reef gleaning, which supplies many women with a considerable portion of their daily household diet and nutritional input. Women's most prominent paid role is in post-harvest processing and distribution. Highlighting and valuing the important roles that women play in fisheries is an important step to women's empowerment. Giving a formal status to their contribution and work and providing them with access to key services and resources is vital for sustainable fisheries management. Integrating a gender perspective in biodiversity policies and projects. Strengthen women's fisheries organisations and networks to promote women's working conditions and rights. Improve the gender balance and women's participation in training and capacity building in fisheries production and management. Ensure that the issues related to women's rights and empowerment are part of the discussion in policy development on fisheries and aquaculture, particularly at national and regional levels. Develop gender-sensitive indicators to measure and assess the contribution of small-scale aquaculture to sustainable rural development with sex disaggregated data. Strengthen gender awareness and sensitivity of staff in agencies who are responsible for developing or delivering fisheries projects to ensure men and women in target populations benefit equally. Integrating a gender perspective in biodiversity policies and projects. Advocate for equal access for men and women to and control over land. Promote equal access to resources and opportunities by establishing gender action plans in agricultural institutions. Develop gender mainstreaming strategies based on good gender analysis for policies and projects. Ensure all agricultural policies and projects are gender responsive and make women's voices heard in decision making at all levels. Organize gender awareness and sensitivity training for agricultural extension workers and train or hire more female agricultural extension workers. Protected areas. Gender roles and division of labour related to protected areas. Gender issues are often overlooked in wildlife conservation efforts, as well as in the management of protected areas. This is reflected in the corresponding decision-making processes. Factors that influence sustainable wildlife management, such as human-wildlife conflicts, illegal trade, poverty, and livelihood security, have significant gender dimensions. For instance, activities usually performed by women, such as collecting water and firewood, expose them to the risk of being attacked by wild animals in communities bordering protected areas. Benefits of empowerment. Recognizing women's deep knowledge of natural resources and their potential as agents of change for sustainable development can simultaneously increase the effectiveness of conservation efforts, while also ensuring empowerment and gender equality. In the Biological Reserve of Vizcaíno in Baja, California, Mexico, women have been trained as lookouts for whales. This has provided them with skills in marine environment conservation, as well as with a new source of income. These women have also become models for younger generation of women and men. Integrating a gender perspective in biodiversity policies and projects. Ensure women's leadership and participation in protected areas design and management. Conduct a gender analysis to identify how women and men interact with their environment when using and managing natural resources in protected areas. Consider the differences and inequalities that the analysis reveals by designing targeted actions, conducting appraisals, allocating budgets, planning activities, and analyzing sensitive indicators to evaluate results. Provide training and sensitizing sessions on gender equality to all the key actors involved in project management. Key message: biodiversity conservation is enhanced by incorporating women's knowledge and skills and improving their participation and leadership in policy and project design and implementation. 3. How do gender-responsive approaches contribute to effective biodiversity conservation policies and projects? Let's see.